God, we are grateful for the blessing, the many ways that you bless us. We're grateful that you love us, care for us, and that your creation is one of the ways that we are reminded of your love. We're grateful for the ways that you care for us through one another. And we pray we'd have that experience yet again this week. Amen. I think I'm going to try to use this one because it's a little more awkward, and so be more opportunities for it to fall over and things like that. So that'll be good. That'll be good. Here, we'll do the while I'm rearranging, doing this magic. The Taizé community, of which Kathy spoke, is a community of Protestant and Catholic. Thanks, Bob. You saw me in my time of need. Appreciate that. It's a community of Protestant and Catholic brothers, and it was created in the 1940s as a place of unity. You know what was happening around 1940, yeah, in Europe, and they have created a whole songbook, and these happen to be some of my favorite songs. I know some of you don't like the repetitiveness, but the repetitiveness for me is really, it's really contemplative, and it's really centering. And some people describe it as we sing the song until it sings us. And I appreciate the Taizé movement, and there are many youth pilgrimages that go there. We had one from yearly meeting I was a part of at one point that went and spent part of a summer there in the Taizé community. And so we'll have a few more of the Taizé songs as the week goes along here. But I've appreciated that, and thank you, Kathy, for helping me scratch that itch. Where'd you go? There you are. And it is good to be with you, and I'm just really so grateful for the opportunity for fellowship, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. Maybe you're and there are other people coming up later, and there'll be some ins and outs of folks, but I really hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to get to know some people better. That's one of the things that we get to do here, and it was the biggest comment that we got from people last year was, "Wow, I've known that person for a long time, but I got to sit down and talk to him for an hour, and now I feel like I really know who they are." And so I hope you'll take advantage of that. And as you look around the room, you'll know that there are some people you don't know. I can guarantee it. And I hope that you will reach out to folks and find ways to build some relationships, because I think that's good for our yearly meeting. And I'm an extrovert, so I always think that. Friends, if you're coming to us online, or we're coming to you online, I guess more like it, I'd love to know if you or somebody that listened in or watched the recording of this. I need to know who to explain myself to later. So if you'd let us know, that would be great. I'm serious. It would be neat to know we're using YouTube, so we don't really get to see who the participants are. So that would be helpful. And thank you for being here. When I was a pastor in Idaho, it seems like a lifetime ago, but I had the opportunity to work with a lot of families and couples, but two couples particularly, who, when they came to the church, were not married. And the first couple came to our meeting both having experienced really ugly divorces. And they had both stepchildren and a child together, and they jumped in and they were very involved. And after a few months with us, they wanted to talk with the pastoral team simply to explain how good it had been going at our church and how welcome they felt and what they were learning and enjoying. But they also wanted to let us know, however, that they never intended to get married. And they just wanted to be clear about that and see if that was going to be a problem. And their marriage experiences have been so painful. So they had decided that that was not for them. So we said, hey, we understand, and we're so glad that you're a part of the church. So glad. Now, we had several of those kinds of situations of people wanting to attend, but very uncertain that they could fulfill what they thought might be the rules. And most had grown up in really painful church experiences. One woman I remember set up a face-to-face interview with me. She came to my office. She had her pad and pen and her list of questions that she was going to ask me. And so she asked a number of questions, everything from what happens in a Quaker meeting. She had read some things online, but her main question was, do I have to believe in God for my family to attend? Do I have to believe in God? I assured her that she didn't. She didn't have to believe in God in order. I don't know why there it goes. I assured her that she didn't. And I felt pretty confident that though we had a fairly large portion of folks who would kind of take a conservative view on some of that, and they were not necessarily agree with those situations, they would love these families very well. I had that confidence most of the time. So we journeyed with all of them and worked to love them, and the depth of relationship meant everything. It was a good time in our meeting. Now, those represent some of the finer moments as a church of being welcoming. Another woman in our meeting had lost her husband when her 3 kids were quite young. And when the kids were youth age, she met someone really great. And after some time, he planned to move in with her and the kids. For some reason I will never fully understand, I got this legalistic streak in me, which happens from time to time. So I decided it would be a good idea to have lunch with him and express my concern about them moving in together. Now, I'm a big believer in marriage. I think it's ultimately the strongest situation for a couple, but I do understand that there are a number of reasons why it's fraught with issues. It is not simple. That lunch with Jeff is still one of my biggest regrets in pastoral ministry. I did not have much of a relationship with Jeff to start with, and he'd only started showing up at church because of Tracy. While the first couple that I talked about eventually decided that not only did they want to get married, they wanted a Quaker-style wedding where they stood up at the end of worship and exchanged vows, and they wanted some of our worship choruses to come as their wedding music. The community had not judged them. They loved them no matter what, and it was an amazing thing. Now, as you might imagine, the opposite happened for the second couple. I lost the opportunity to be in much relationship with them, and I harmed the opportunity that our meeting had to love them unconditionally. While they stayed marginally connected, and our other pastor was asked to perform the wedding, there was deep, deep, deep hurt. I'd put the rule above the relationship. I tried to police their morality. I'm sure they would appreciate it. It was not appreciated. And I think as the story got around the church, which it eventually did, there were folks who were a little surprised and honestly disappointed. In Galatians chapter 2, Paul tells a story about how many of the Jews who had become Christ's followers were now balking at the opportunity to share table fellowship with the Gentile believers in Antioch. That's another way of saying to eat with them. Prior to Christ, Jews and Gentiles had nothing to do with each other. And in this case, particularly, Paul calls out Peter. I think he's most times referred to as Cephas in the passage in Galatians 2. Peter, who was a Jew and had a very important vision or dream that is recorded in the book of Acts in chapter 10. And a vision that urged him to, strangely enough, kill and eat the kinds of creatures that Jews had been forbidden to eat. Certainly not kosher. Peter protests several times in this vision that he would never eat anything profane or unclean, but the voice kept saying to him, "What God has purified, do not call unclean." Immediately following this vision, Peter has an encounter with a Gentile Christian or centurion known as Cornelius, who had also had a vision at the same time and was searching to know more about Christ. And Peter goes to where Cornelius is, and it's a fabulous story. Peter came away from that vision a changed man. His whole paradigm and everything his life had been built around had shifted drastically. He, in fact, decides then to seek out Gentiles and share the gospel. Now, it's hard to explain how drastic this was and the vast change that this vision had on him. God had been at work in his life, and his paradigm had shifted dramatically. He finds himself in Antioch, which is in modern-day Turkey, and Antakya is the name of the current city, but it is in modern-day Turkey, as I said. Eventually, some Jewish believers, while he's there visiting in Antioch, living there, the mother church sent some people out from Jerusalem, right? And he gets cold feet and won't eat with the Gentile believers. The passage says, I like this terminology in the NRSV, he feared the circumcision faction. Wouldn't you like to be a part of the circumcision faction? I wonder if they had badges or card-carrying members of the circumcision faction. I don't know if that's one. Many times they're referred to as the Judaizers in Scripture. Those who still felt like Jews should uphold Jewish law and that the Jews and the Gentiles should continue to be separate, even if they were believers and followers of Christ. And his fear or hesitation was unfortunately contagious, as those who had previously shared table fellowship now also drew back. Can you imagine the hurt that caused, possibly within the Gentiles that were there? All of a sudden, Paul, he's now resistant. Maybe these stories, I don't know, I think help illustrate something that I've been writing about recently in our weekly newsletter. And I don't know how many of you have slogged through those over the last few weeks, but I came upon this model it's been about 20 years ago now. And it's a concept that uses a much older, more than 20 years, mathematical and sociological concept for grouping. And some theologians have kind of used it to think about models for the church. And there have been some really smart visionary folks who have fleshed this out in a helpful way, at least for me. You may at the end go, I don't know what he's thinking, but this is something I found very helpful. And it compares what is called bounded sets and centered sets, okay? So maybe you're familiar with that term. So bounded sets, which are kind of illustrated up here, and I'm talking about it more as the church here. They're defined by a clear border or boundary. You see the circle. And that boundary is meant to keep the inside on the inside and the outside on the outside, right? Cells are great examples of this, human cells. The cell wall protects the contents of the cell. Or a soccer team, if we're going to use the World Cup example here, okay? The cell wall protects the contents, and the soccer team, a World Cup level soccer team at least, there's a clear understanding of who and what belongs on the inside of that team, right? There's clarity about how one becomes a part of the World Cup team. It's not one probably most of us could belong to. maybe some of you. Maybe Myron. Nope, not even Myron, but yeah, no, maybe. So bounded sets always have, and hear this, bounded sets always have some sense of exclusion. Okay? And that's the purpose of the boundary. The purpose of the boundary is to decide what's in and what's out of the set. Okay? Centered sets, on the other hand, and I don't really like some of these illustrations I got, but they'll kind of help define here. They're illustrated not by a boundary on the outside, but by a common center. Now, authors Frost and Hirsch, not Robert Frost, but Frost and Hirsch use the concept of wells and fences. So fences in the bounded set and wells as the centered set. In a Quaker meeting, this might describe a shared purpose, an understanding of why we exist. That's what the center is. And folks are invited to journey towards that center. You'll see that in this illustration, at least, some of the people are aimed at the center, some are not. So while they are not excluded from the church at all, the ones who are really the ones who are moving towards the center are the ones that are moving towards the mission and purpose of the church, and others may at times be more centered than others. So because centered sets is less black and white, right? The goal is that people can belong before believing. It's possible to come and belong, like the first couple I talked about. They could come and be a part of the church. They weren't there yet, but people kind of loved them into understanding and in some level of belief. In many cases, we would say it's a call to follow God. The center is the purpose is to follow God through Christ, to embrace God's love and God's call for us, and a growing closeness to Christ and to the Spirit as the avenues where we better understand how we become more and more like Christ. It's the direction that we face that's important here. So the encouragement of the local meeting is to encourage people in that direction. Now, a few caveats. No model is perfect. A centered set church is not a church with no boundaries, okay? I want to be clear about that. Boundaries are needed in all social relationships. Barriers are another thing. So you hear the difference, maybe barriers and boundaries. Those may be two different distinctions. A church with no borders, but with no center, would be described as in this terminology, a fuzzy set or an open set, right? You get that? There's no boundary, but there's also no center. So people are kind of, hey, I'm a part of this group, and that's what they call it in the stuff, a fuzzy set. I like that. Don't be a fuzzy set, okay? And I think those titles are fairly descriptive, right? And there are churches and meetings that we know or that fit these undefined descriptions, that they're unclear about who they are and what they're inviting people to. So bounded set meetings are often susceptible, though. This is the bounded one with the boundary that kind of decides who's in and who's out. These are susceptible to authoritarianism and legalism, all the isms, sectarianism, judgmentalism, you name it, we can ism all day, okay? Certainly, though, not all bounded set churches or meetings go to those extremes, but I think the modern churches where the blight, I will say, of Christian nationalism flourishes are most often severely bounded set churches. Does that make sense? I think where Christian nationalism flourishes, I'll say it again, those are severely bounded set churches. I mean, some churches even set out to be bounded like that. And the advantage of that is that it means it's clear about what you have to believe and what you need to do and how you have to act in order to belong, right? Everybody knows kind of what the rules are, or you soon find out. Now, we have our own Quaker boundedness in our history, right? Can you think of some reasons, some wild reasons that people got read out of meeting at some point? Marrying outside the faith, right? What else? Using too much alcohol or any. Celebrating Christmas, that's right. You celebrate Christmas, boy, that was one of those heathen holidays. Serving in the military, what else? What's that? Oh, having an organ, having, instruments. Or upstairs in your attic in the case of Friendly Persuasion, right? If you haven't seen that movie, it's a great one. So anyway, yeah, there were all kinds of crazy reasons that Quaker said, "Up, you're out," and I understand that there was, intentions were good. They sought to protect the movement, but that was a little rough sometimes when we read back through that. We think, ugh. I'll also admit that a bounded set situation is really attractive to some folks, right? Some people really want to be a part of that. Then they don't have to think, right? I don't have to be discerning. They're just going to tell me what it is that I'm to do and not to do, and that makes it easy. It's clear, in and out, black and white. It also plays really well to fear-mongering. Whether it's the fear of hell or the fear of the world out there that's trying to attract Christians, right? So fear-mongering is easily stirred up within bounded set churches. So anyway, I think these types of churches are a part of the demise of the church in America, quite honestly. But at least they're clear about where they're going, right? Because equally to blame are the churches that have no idea what their center looks like and are really becoming, here you go, Jade, fuzzy set churches that just exist in a comfortable space where the true community is a bit elusive and it's an insular social club. Both of those are at fault, and I don't want us to be there. I don't think that generally tends to be where we are or where we hope to be. But humans tend towards boundedness, right? We naturally self-differentiate. So as we're growing, we begin to understand us and me and someone else. And that grows sometimes into somewhat unhealthy standards. But it's not all bad, but it can be. There are groups inside the meeting that are healthfully bounded, like a committee or a pastoral team, a group of social or Sunday school teachers who are required to have a background check and receive training before they can teach, right? That's a bounded set. You know how to be a part of that group, and there are rules to follow, and those are good boundaries to have. In a centered set meeting, the center is the most important and is something people are always moving towards, we hope. There are different expressions of that center of faith among various denominations. And among Quakers, we might say that our understanding of being centered is that we also believe simply that Christ has called us, who is the center of our lives in this community, and has called us to things like peacemaking and equality and simplicity. Christ is our present teacher. There's a list of those things. And these are not just add-ons that we kind of accessorize our faith with. We kind of have this generic faith, and then we kind of hang on a peace thing here, an equality thing. These are central to who we are as friends. Now, we wouldn't require somebody to be a conscientious objector per se, but we would, in a centered set meeting, consistently teach about serious peace building. And to be clear, that it is a central part of our understanding of God's call on us as followers. For instance, I think sometimes in our attempt, we don't want to be offensive, so we don't always do a good job of being clear about what defines the center. Other denominations consider other things to be part of their centered faith expressions, and people appreciate and move into those things as they feel called by God. Now, that might be like splitting hairs. Some of you are out there you're figuring out what's wrong with this model. That's just how your mind works. That's okay, Jade. But but I would suggest that it is about the center, which rather than the way that people are allowed to come in and go out. Okay, the two differences. I really want us to be able to focus on the center rather than the gatekeeping. Because then members and attenders, using the Spirit's guidance, decide if they are called to journey with this particular group of pilgrims. I think it's of it like the supposedly true story of George Fox and William Penn. George Fox tells William Penn, wear your sword as long as you can. It was not for Fox to command him or shame him for wearing the sword, but to leave that to the Spirit. And that is a part of being centered. Fox had solid beliefs or clear beliefs, but he invited Penn to continually to decide and discern. I felt like the people of the Boise Friends meeting where we were loved that first couple to the point that they wanted to lay down their prohibition of marriage. It was not a requirement to be a part of the meeting. I think they truly experienced God's movement in their lives and that their lives changed in many ways for the good. This points to another element of the centered set model that is really challenging. And it means we have to be clearly committed that we will trust God with those who are seeking. And we will trust that people who are seeking the center can indeed hear and obey the present teacher. Do you hear that? We need to trust God with people, and we need to trust people in their discernment with God. It's when we stop trusting those and decide that we need to take that role where I think it becomes problematic. It's about teaching folks to practice discernment and to listen for God's voice. I was not very discerning in my approach of the second couple. I could have done a number of things differently. I could have done a number of things that I had rushed into. I could have taken more time, could have had a different conversation. I could have had a conversation with both of them. There are several of those things that I did not do a very good job of discerning. I like the Quaker idea that we want to have a posture of convincement rather than coercion. Do we trust God's love to be transformative? That's the question. Do we trust God's love to be transformative? Will people know we are Christians by our love? And will that love draw people? Okay. Everybody breathe. Big breath. Okay. You're awake. Yes. Thank you. By now you might see that moving towards the hard work of an intentional centered set model, I think, is a great way to go. You might think you've figured that out by now, right? That I like this. Again, it takes hard work, intentional openness, and solid discernment in leadership to come to a point where a meeting or a yearly meeting, I wonder about a yearly meeting in this, can agree on just what defines the center. What might it look like for our yearly meeting to think of itself as a centered set? I don't know. Is that possible? What can we agree on together that becomes our center? So there's a variation on this model that I just, for a couple last minutes here, I want to show you that are a little more life-giving to me than the ones I just showed you. So the first image illustrates this a little bit differently. This one is different from our circles, right? So the centered set circle or the boundary circle. Instead of a well, which can feel sort of stationary, it's just one point. This one shows that the work and reign of God is on the move. Yeah? The reign of God is simply where God is at work. That's what that means. That's not my terminology. It's from the originators of this model. But God's not static. God doesn't stay in one place. God doesn't live in our meeting houses. I don't know if you knew that. And Pat, God does not even live at camp only, right? I just told a group of kids last week as they were getting ready to go home, God is going home with you. God is ahead of you. And I think this illustrates some of that. God's purpose, his mission, is to reconcile all of creation to God's self. That reconciliation is about relationships between people, between God and people. It's about our relationship with our own hearts. Sometimes we have a harder time in our relationship with ourselves than we do with other people. And it's about the reconciliation of all creation. Talks about this in Colossians and other places. God wants to reconcile all of creation to God's self. So God does not wait for people to walk into the church, right? We're there on Sunday mornings, ready for people to walk into the church, and we're going to be really friendly, and we just hope they'll show up. God is on the move, loving and redeeming God's creation. It doesn't mean that God's not there on Sunday morning, but God's continuing to be on the movement. So that requires vision on our part to notice and move towards the work of God. This movement should have a very big role in shaping what our center is. It's the understanding that Christ has come, is here to work through his people, but that God's mission is not completed. And there are so many that are in need of reconciliation. Our climate is in need of reconciliation as well. And here's the second image. I think this is the one. So there's a need for us. So in this, do you notice the I guess it's an angle. As people move in that towards God's reign, some things happen. What do you notice that happens as we move in that angle? What do you notice? As it gets closer to God, we get closer together, right? As people move towards, and we're moving as a pilgrim people of God, as we get closer to where God's reign and God is at work, we get closer to one another. You can see that the church, the congregation, is that dotted line all around there, and there are people who are a part of it. It's dotted so that people can come in easily. It's not keeping people out. We might even begin to use directional language instead of insider-outsider language. I've visited all your churches if you're a part of Western Yearly Meeting, and there's a lot of insider language because we all know each other, right? So, Noah is taking the names down for the event that's coming up this week, right? And we all know who Noah is, right? No, we don't. No, we don't all. If you're new, you don't know who Noah is, right? Anybody in here know who Noah is? Noah, raise your hand. This is Noah over here, okay? But if you're new, you don't know who Noah is, right? And so let's begin using directional language and maybe less insider language. That's maybe not the best example, but Noah, I wanted to use his name so that you knew him. This fits so well with this Quaker understanding of what and where the church is. The church is a collection of people. It's not a building. And so we understand as the pilgrim people of God that we are moving towards God's reign. Now, within that, there might be some bounded sets, right? Maybe there's a group of people who have decided that they want to go much deeper in discipleship. That might be a group that starts to meet together. But it doesn't leave people out. It's within the congregation that is permeable, right? Anyway, I like this picture. And I wonder what it would look like to think of your meeting this way. How many of you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have a real clear sense of what the center calling of your meeting is? If you were to say this, we might all have a mission statement, but if we said it boils down to these things as centered, this is what we are inviting people to journey into. You might have a real clear sense of that. You might not. Maybe it's worth considering. I don't know. We know that we should love others. We're not always clear about what that means sometimes. And there are some of us to like to pull out well, one way to love folks is to tell them what they're doing wrong. We want to correct them so they don't go astray. Right? Have you ever felt that? Well, you obviously heard the story about how I did that. But too often, there are times where we really want to love someone by really correcting them. And I don't disagree that having those conversations can be helpful at times, but only if it's the kind of relationship you have with someone who has asked you for that kind of accountability, right? You need to be in a relationship where that accountability is a shared practice in your relationship. John reminds us both in his gospel and epistle, 1 John, that we are loved by God, and as such we're called to love as Christ loves us, sacrificially, boldly, and as unjudgmentally as we can muster. This week you're going to hear more about what it might look like to be a Quaker today. Maybe listen for the ways that we can be on the move with the Spirit. As the reign of God moves, are we in tandem with it? Are we in harmony with that Spirit of God? How can we center our lives and the mission of our meeting in such a way that it brings about life? I think this fits very well with some of the things Tom has been leading in some of our meetings about culture and about some of the things that we're facing. And I think as we come to understand some of the challenges that we're facing, I think one of the ways that we can lean into that is to say, what centers us? What is it that we're centered on? And how can we then take those understandings and move in a centered way and invite people in to be a part of that? Something to think about. So let's wait for just a few more moments with some quiet. If you want to speak, please feel free to do so. But let's ask God to speak to us about what it is that we are being called to.